Let me tell you a story about Section 31. No, not that story. We'll get to that soon enough, believe me. Let's start with a much better story. From the heady days of 1998, when Deep Space Nine Season 6 introduced the organisation as an unsanctioned intelligence and security operation that worked largely in secret outside the Federation's legal and moral code to protect its citizens and their interests. At this time, the Federation found itself locked in a war for survival against the Dominion, but it looked like they might get a reprieve when the Dominion's leadership, the shape-shifting founders, came down with a mysterious disease that threatened to wipe out their entire species. Of course, it turns out Section 31 created this plague as a way to rid the Federation of a mortal enemy, but their involvement is eventually exposed along with the existence of a cure, which the Federation's civilian leadership consider sharing with the founders, but ultimately decide against it, arguably giving tacit approval to one of the worst genocides in recorded history, albeit one perpetrated against people who would do the same to them without a moment's hesitation. But in true Star Trek style, the script doesn't particularly lecture the viewer as to whether that was the right decision. The question is left open for us to think about, exemplifying the mature and contemplative tone that Star Trek at its best was always known for, and which Deep Space Nine took even further by exploring what happens when the impossibly perfect, and let's face it, somewhat condescending morality of the Federation rubs up against the realities of a universe that doesn't always work the way they would like it to. So having been entrusted with that golden legacy, I'm sure current Star Trek showrunner Alex Kurtzman and his team will have wanted to treat Deep Space Nine's creation with the respect it deserves, and carry on in the same manner.
You're in Section 31? That is totally killer! Yeah, Slay Queen, bring it!
Oh dear God. Yes, I'm exaggerating, but not by as much as you might hope. You know, Kurtzman's bastardization of Star Trek has too many faults to fully cover here, but to me, the most egregious of them all isn't so much the literal canon violations, or even the overtly woke political messaging. It's the way they never understood that if the garbage they churn out doesn't look like Star Trek, it isn't written like Star Trek, and it isn't acted like Star Trek, then it's not Star Trek. But even amongst Kurtzman's litany of failures, this embarrassment manages to plumb new depths of retardation. The action begins in the Mirror Universe. That would of course be the Mirror Universe that Kirk and crew discovered for the first time in 1967 episode Mirror Mirror, but naturally Kurtzman had to take that away from them and have the Discovery crew get there first. Because they're better than Kirk, you see, and if you disagree with that, then you're a racist and a sexist, so shut up and take your medicine, man-baby. But, as if anybody cares, we get to find out how a young Mirror Universe Philippa Georgiou came to be leader of the Terran Empire, and it's possibly the single most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Because it turns out she got the job by winning a Hunger Games-style gladiatorial contest against a bunch of other teenagers plucked from around the Empire. I hope I don't have to spell out how absurd this is, but just in case. If we take the Hunger Games comparison a little further, this amounts to the equivalent of President Snow saying, "Congratulations, Katniss, you've won the Hunger Games. You are now President of Panem." And look, I'm not exactly in the target demographic for the Hunger Games movies, but I don't particularly have anything against them. They do their job well enough as mildly inspirational empowerment tales for teenage girls. But what Kurtzman has managed to do here is take Star Trek and make it even dumber than that. Because, you see, in organisations like the Terran Empire, power belongs to those who can take it, and those who have it would not willingly surrender it based on anything even vaguely resembling a fair contest. I did briefly wonder if this is intended as some sort of left-wing critique of the concept of meritocracy, but no, I suspect that would be too profound for these people, and all they've really done is expose their own naivety about the way the world really works. Anyway, as the dozens of people who watched Star Trek Discovery long enough will already know, evil Philippa eventually hopped across to our universe, where she happily earns a living running a space-age twink club when she's approached by some Section 31 agents with a mission for her. Amongst others, their numbers include this guy, who looks like the thing that turns up when you order a Borg drone off of AliExpress. And if you've seen the trailer and were raging at the way this Vulcan doesn't look, act or sound remotely like a Vulcan, there is actually a reason for that, and it's somehow even more insultingly stupid than what you imagined. Oh, and if you're a classic Star Trek fan, your heart will sink when you realise this character is meant to be a young Rachel Garrett, captain of the Enterprise C. Seriously, why'd they do this? Captain Garrett was only ever seen on screen once, in an episode of The Next Generation that aired 35 years ago. The only people who even know who the character is are the ones they're insulting by making this garbage, and they're not going to buy us off by waving a few member berries in our collective faces. But what does Section 31 want with the evil Empress? Well, they want to recruit her for a generic MacGuffin hunt in a race against time before a cliched masked assailant uses it to unleash some unspeakable evil, leading to a supposedly dramatic final showdown where the villain's identity is revealed in a twist so obvious you can see it coming from fluidic space. All in all, this is, by some margin, the worst attempt at a Star Trek production I have ever seen. And bearing in mind how far the franchise has fallen under Kurtzman's stewardship, that really is quite an achievement. This is actually the first time in a couple of years that I've even bothered watching any of the Discoveryverse nonsense, and as hard as it is to believe, it's actually gotten worse. It's almost like they've given up pretending it takes place within the established Star Trek continuity, and now they're just churning out generic action schlock that looks like a low-budget knockoff of Guardians of the Galaxy, with a few Star Trek trademarks thrown in to attract casual viewers who don't know any better. The idea that this abomination is set in the same universe as The Wrath of Khan, The Best of Both Worlds, or In the Pale Moonlight isn't just offensive, it's actually laughable. And I think that's why the fan backlash against it is more muted than we've seen against similar fallen franchises. I'm not going to pretend that Disney's Star Wars revival is anything to be proud of, but the one thing they do consistently get right is the way they make sure everything looks, sounds, and generally feels like it's believably taking place in the classic Star Wars universe. In other words, it is Star Wars, it's just bad Star Wars. And although I think Kurtzman's attempts at Star Trek are objectively much worse than releases like The Last Jedi or The Acolyte, they don't corrupt our memories of the original in the same way that seeing Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker reduced to suckling on an alien manatee's mummy milk does to Star Wars fans. You see, Section 31, like the rest of Alex Kurtzman's creations, isn't Star Trek. It has nothing to do with Star Trek. It isn't set in the same universe, it isn't canon, and it doesn't carry forward the same themes or advance any established narrative. And that's a good thing, because it makes it all that much easier to continue doing what real Star Trek fans have done since the beginning of Kurtzman's reign, and simply ignore it.